People are more concerned than ever about being organized to respond to any kind of an SHTF event. And with all the unrest happening around the country, it's easy to see why. Don't be fooled by some of these fringe elements that are out there. They're much more organized than anyone gives them credit for. So it is a good strategy to get together with your community and try to make sure there's a plan of action in case you ever have to come to terms with defending that community. So stick around for the rest of the video. We'll talk about how you can prepare better by trying to organize your teams for SHTF using community logistics and strategy. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about how you can organize teams for SHTF, how you can have your community better when it comes to strategy and logistics for trying to protect you, yours, your community, and everything else that's important to you in your life. There's a lot going on lately, and there's a lot of fringe elements out there that are operating in a way that makes people feel the need to defend themselves, which makes them feel a need to organize and be a little bit more efficient about how they would respond to these people infiltrating their community, okay? So just for example, groups like Antifa, they are not as unorganized as people like to assume. Think of how the art of war works. You want to appear weak when you're actually strong so that people don't give you the credit you deserve and then underestimate you in case there's ever a situation involving your group. And that's exactly what's happening right now. There has been reports of the activity that Antifa and groups like it have been using in these major metropolitan areas that are very similar to insurgencies in other countries around the world. And what I mean by that is that they're organized. They have overwatch up on buildings. They're using communication and comms to get through to everybody on the ground from up high to give them an overview of what's happening. They're using vehicles logistically to move around the city and create mobile roadblocks and to corner anybody that they've targeted as being non-desirable for their cause. So these are things that are happening, but nobody's giving that credit where it's due because everybody wants to assume that, you know, of course they would roll over the second something were to start. But that's a bad assumption to make, and that's exactly how strategy from the other side would work when it comes to this situation. You would want to seem weak so that people underestimate you so they don't put any organization or effort into meeting the threat that you are actually producing. So, if you're organizing for SHTF and you're worried about your community and you want to find out better ways to be more strategic when it comes to responding to the situations we're all seeing right now, hit the subscribe button below because I'll try my best to keep giving you concepts and ideas and things that we can all work on while we're waiting for more to happen. While we're waiting to see what happens next, we can organize better, we can work on our strategy, and we can build on concepts that everybody knows are basically a rule of thumb in this day and age, okay? So, what I want to say first is that there's a saying, okay? Tactics win battles, logistics win wars. The reason for that saying is that supply lines and strategy and having consistency of equipment is so important and so dominant when it comes to winning a war because the organizational efforts are streamlined, they're more efficient, and they get people and supplies where they need to be faster and more easily. And that's something that all of us should be concerned about. Prepping is a lot about logistics. It's a lot about efficiencies. You know, we all prefer a multi-tool that can do more than one thing rather than multiple tools that are required to do the same job. That's just something that is part of preparation and part of preparing for any SHTF events. So when you're trying to build SHTF teams, and when I say that, what I mean is your community or your mag or your tribe or the people you have close within your circle that you're going to rely on during an SHTF event. How do you make sure that you guys are as organized as you can be or as efficient as you can be when it comes to your gear, when it comes to your supplies, when it comes to your strategy, and everybody being on the same page so everything's much easier to manage? Now, if you are a prepper, you're somebody who is of a prepared mindset, you take training, you have skills, you've spent time learning and researching about the different necessities of survival during an SHTF event, you're going to be looked at as a leader. You're going to be looked at as somebody who has their stuff together and needs, you know, to supply the rest of their group with that morale and that leadership in order to make it through a survival situation. And if you're watching this video and you're watching channels like mine or other channels out there that are similar to this one, you're probably that person in your group. It's just how these things work. And I've accepted the fact that generally I would probably end up in that position when it comes to my group, because that's just how the ball tends to roll. It tends to roll into your court when you're the person who is the supposed expert on the situation. Whether or not you are or not doesn't matter. It's the perception of others that actually puts you into that position. So you need to start making these decisions. You need to start having meetings, and you need to start communicating with your group to make sure that all these bases are covered to give you a better situation at hand in case you ever find yourselves in an emergency or in a situation where you have to protect you and your own, okay? So first off, when it comes to logistical strategy in your community, things that we have to consider, okay? Communications is huge. You need to have consistency of communications. What that means is utilize the same equipment if possible and have comm channels already pre-selected that you are all going to rely on in case of an emergency. If you don't have a designated comm channel for your group, then what is the point of even having comms? Are you going to just switch between frequencies until you randomly stumble on each other, and in the meantime possibly give away your position or your situation to somebody who is more malicious? That is definitely possible. So make sure you do what you can when it comes to comms beforehand. Establish those comm channels, establish the type of equipment you're going to use. If you're going to use two-way Motorola radios, fine, but decide on a channel that everybody's going to link up on, and then try to move forward in your comms into better realms and better possibilities of what you're capable of. Currently, I utilize the Baofeng UV5R. It's definitely considered one of the most easy to acquire ham radios out there on the market today. And what you're looking at back here behind me is actually what I'm calling my Buddy Loadout. This is an entire kit right here that's specifically designed for me to give to somebody else who I know is in my inner circle and is not as prepared as I am. And this Buddy Loadout is going to help us get through a situation much easier than just hoping to hodgepodge throw together some kind of a kit for somebody that doesn't have any consistency of value, okay? So on this kit, you see a Baofeng UV5R. That's because that's what I'm going to be utilizing as well. I want that consistency of gear so I can train somebody else on how to use it, and so we can be on the same comms and frequencies without it being an issue of being cross-platform or anything along those lines. So that's what you need to make sure you have figured out for your comms. What's the equipment you're using? What are the comm channels you're going to utilize? And what is the purpose of the comms? Are you going to have somebody in charge of comms who is going to dictate how everybody else communicates versus just trying to randomly shoot conversation back and forth? Those are things that need to be decided now, okay? Next is going to be your defensive loadout, which, as you can see, I have a consistency of equipment right here on the table that I am trying to utilize in order to make everybody's lives a little bit easier. So, consistency of equipment, what does that mean? Well, for your loadouts, you want to have the same calibers, you want to have the same magazines, you want to have the same platforms, so that way there's redundancy of parts, there's redundancy of mags, there's redundancy of ammunition, there's redundancy of everything, so that way if people are less prepared than you can at least take your expertise and maintain their equipment for them, or you can switch between mags. If somebody runs out of rounds, you can toss a magazine to them, and you have that consistency of equipment at that time. So here I built a very basic AR-15 and 5.56. This is extremely basic. I went with a stainless steel barrel only because it was less expensive than trying to upgrade to a different type of barrel, and it was also less maintenance in the long run than a nitride or powder coat barrel of some kind, because stainless steel has that weather resistance to it, which I don't expect somebody with less experience than myself to actually maintain a rifle as well as I can. So one of the reasons why I went with stainless steel was that it's a very basic setup. This whole build, minus the accessories, when we're talking about sights, lights, everything else, was probably about $450. So very inexpensive for me to put this build together. Then I attached a sling, an optic, and a light. And that's basically what I would expect for anybody else to give to someone with less experience, because it's going to give them that additional edge on being able to utilize the platform without that experience that you might have. So you want to make sure they can see what they're shooting at, especially in the sense of friendly fire situations. You want to see that their optic is zeroed in and ready to go, so that way what they're shooting at is actually what they're engaging, and it doesn't end up going towards the wrong target. And you want to put a sling on it so they can always have it on them, carry it more easily, and not get it taken away from them in a situation of emergency. And those are things that I would expect to hand to someone else and feel comfortable with, that they're well set up. Not just a basic rifle with nothing on it, just the standard iron sights. Yes, that's still better than nothing, and don't get me wrong. If you have an extra one of those, of course, utilize it. But maybe at least throw a sling on it or something like that, okay? But with this 5.56 and this Glock 17 that's right here for them as well, we can exchange magazines, we can exchange ammunition, and we can exchange parts if need be, because I have redundancy of these items in my collection, and that is something that I can then utilize to make sure that me and this person I'm going to give this kit to are both as prepared as we can be. They also have a first aid administration style pouch over here on their side, which is going to let them deal with basic first aid. I'm not trying to get complicated with somebody who doesn't have experience, but they need the ability to treat themselves or somebody else easily, and they also need some other basic admin style stuff just to get through a basic situation. So these are things you need to consider for your group. Have you guys talked about what caliber are we running? What types of mags are we running? What types of platforms are we running? You know, I've chosen Glock and I've chosen 9mm for the sidearm platform because it's so prevalent and so common that if I do find myself building a bigger tribe or a bigger mag of some kind, then I'm able to probably still utilize the same equipment I already have versus trying to adapt a different system that is more, let's say, specific than what most people would probably have. So going with the Glock platform with me was a big part of that decision of trying to keep consistency of equipment, not just for me and somebody else that I pass things along to, but for the idea of building a bigger mag at some point and hopefully having a lot of other like-minded people that generally seem to choose Glock as a sidearm. So that's something else you need to decide. Make sure all this makes sense. Now, if you're going to have different positions within your team, so let's say I have an AR-10 in 308, which we all know that I do. Well, maybe I'm on Overwatch, maybe I'm on a DMR situation, and maybe everybody else is running 5.56. That's all decisions that have to be made based on necessity. But the idea of having that consistency of equipment and gear and caliber is very important for the idea of logistics, okay? And we're going to move on to as why that's so important, okay? So another thing to consider that a lot of people don't think about is type of transport and fuel, okay? So let's say you have a group of guys, a group of families, let's say, that all get together and decide, okay, we're gonna have this mag, we're gonna have this group that's ready to go in case there's ever an emergency, and we wanna train together and work together and make sure that everybody can help each other out. Well, does your mag all use the same fuel in their engines? Do you have two guys with diesel trucks and two guys with gasoline trucks? Do you guys have somebody running an electric car as part of their transport? You don't want to have a bunch of difference when it comes to that. Yes, sometimes having extra options is good in case you come across more fuel supply that maybe doesn't work with everything you have, and you have at least an option. But when it comes to efficiency and it comes to storing fuel or procuring fuel or making sure that you have enough to get the job done that you need, make sure you guys are running like fuel if possible. You know, obviously diesel is a very popular way to go, especially with larger trucks and with engine life and everything else being considered. So that might be something you need to decide on. But with these other fringe groups out there, and they're using strategies like mobile roadblocks and driving around cities and blocking people off from escaping. Do you think those people don't have the same type of fuel? I generally think they're probably running straight gasoline. There's very few diesel operators going through and running in those crowds, if you ask me. So keep that in mind, because you know, if you do need to share fuel sources, it's easier if everybody's on the same page. Just something that a lot of people don't consider, okay? Something else, first aid. Make sure your first aid equipment is standardized as well as possible. If everybody's running different types of tourniquet systems or different types of bandage systems or using different types of quick clot or whatever it might be, make sure you have consistency as much as you can so you can all train together and learn how to use it properly, so that way everybody's good at using each other's equipment. That way if I have to rip my med kit off my belt and throw it to a friend, that person knows how to use everything inside of it without having to second guess themselves. If I have a completely different suture kit than they do, maybe they have to sew something up that's bleeding out really quickly or something like that, that person might not be able to be as fast or as efficient as fixing that wound because they're not used to how my suture kit works compared to what they have. So those are things to consider. Make sure you're using the same types of bandages. Make sure you have the same concepts in each first aid kit. You know, do you have super glue in every kit? Do you have a compression bandage? Do you have a blowout kit or just a boo-boo kit? Like, those are things everybody needs to consider. So try your best to standardize that as well. And when it comes to giving someone with less experience first aid items, you want to keep it very simple. You want to keep basic things in there, okay? That they're easy to use. They have even instructions on them possibly, so that way this person can utilize them to the best of their ability without you having to explain everything to them. Imagine if you find yourself in a situation where you're not able to talk. How are they going to utilize some of that first aid gear unless it's super simple to utilize? Keep that in mind, okay? So, another thing we have to consider is subsistence, food, okay? Make sure that everybody has the same concepts when it comes to how we're resupplying food. Is everybody stacking MREs so that there's easy, ready-to-eat meals at any moment, so that way when there is some calm, you can definitely sit down and grub? Or is everybody rocking, you know, mountain house style food where you have to boil it and you have to prep a bunch of water and boil it and get everything ready before you can actually eat? That's going to take a lot more time, and that's going to be a lot harder to put out when it comes to getting calories inside of people's bodies, okay? So keep that in mind. You want to make sure your food supply is on the same page as everybody else. If everybody's just eating tons of different stuff, that can get a little bit harder to deal with when it comes to resupply or making sure everybody has what they need. Something else to consider that a lot of people don't is allergies. If you have a group, somebody's in your group, and maybe they have a nut allergy, okay? So they're allergic to peanuts, and all everybody else has is freaking peanut butter. That's gonna be a problem because that person might end up in shock, or they might not be able to eat and not have the energy they need because the only thing anyone in the group can offer them is more peanut butter. So if you're in a group and you're in a team and you're organized and you're trying to protect yourselves, make sure you're not carrying around something that could kill your buddy because of an allergy they have. So these are things that need to be discussed prior that you can work on right now, okay? Something else is hygiene products. Get very basic. Make sure you just have a ton of just basic toothbrushes, basic toothpaste, good old white bar soap, tons of stuff like that that you can just pass out and everybody has the same, and there's no difference and there's no big deal about what everybody's using. But as long as hygiene can be kept up with, then everybody's going to be much better off. So use cheap generic stuff that you know everybody can utilize, aka super basic cheap toothbrushes, super basic cheap toothpaste, super basic cheap bar soap. That way everybody can maintain hygiene, have the same exact stuff, so that way if I need to toss something to the next person, there isn't any change and there's nothing different about it. Hygiene's still super important, and make sure your group is all in agreement on what that requires and what all that means. You know, maybe you guys all need a bunch of razors, maybe you guys don't shave at all, maybe you're worried about having to wear gas masks and everybody's clean shaven. Those are things you have to decide. And then if you're going to stay clean shaven in order to wear a mask, then you have to make sure you have razors to do so. All those things are things we need to talk about now while we're able to, okay? And think about this. You can go to the store and buy a bunch of razors, of course, but ordering online is going to save you a ton of money, and right now you have the ability to do that. But if things go south, you're not going to be ordering online very much at all. So make sure that you acquire those cheaper, easier to get items now while they're still available, okay? Something else is clothing. Are you guys going to have a uniform? Are you going to wear some kind of a marker? Are you going to have a way of distinguishing each other in the middle of chaos? A lot of times the reason friendly fire happens is because people can't identify each other with all the chaos happening. And that's something that you really need to talk about. Do you want to have identifying markers that puts a target on your back? Do you want to have something very low key that at least lets somebody else know that you're a friend but doesn't necessarily let someone else know you're a target? Those are all things you need to consider. And honestly, I think that some kind of color coordination can go a long way without it being an established uniform to let everyone know exactly what you're up to. Maintain a little bit of gray man status, but have some way of recognizing that that's part of my team over there, and I'm not going to do anything in that direction until I know that person's safe. Those are things that are worth considering because it is hard to see what's happening when there's a lot going on in one place. So consider your clothing options, and then make sure you have that supply as well. Extra socks, extra underwear are huge. If you can stock up on some of those to lend out to a buddy, especially when you have somebody who needs a kit like this because they don't have their own, then guess what? That person's going to thank you very much once they realize that their underwear and socks have fallen apart and become useless. So keep that in mind, okay? And one of the last things we need to discuss, at least for this video, about organizing your teams for SHTF and staying on top of your logistics and strategy is your supply lines, okay? Supply lines are the bloodstream of any major conflict. Without supply lines, people starve, people don't get resupplied with ammunition, people don't make it out of a battle because they don't have any more supplies. You can look back in history and see all the examples of how supply lines were either the most important factor in a battle or how they were also the most targeted factor in a battle to try to eliminate the supply lines for an enemy force. Those are things you have to consider. And your supply line, if it's not well organized and it's not well thought out, and it doesn't have a good escape route or an exit strategy in case things go south, it's going to be targeted as well in case you find yourselves on the other side of a threat. And you have to establish those supply lines now. Do you have a quartermaster position back at camp, let's say, who makes sure that the supplies are going back and forth to where they need to go? Do you have routes that are safe or patrolled? Do you have ways of getting the supplies back and forth to maybe a FOB of some sort? These are all things to consider. I'm not saying we'll ever find ourselves in a situation where any of the stuff I'm talking about right now will ever even be a factor, and I hope we don't, to be honest with you, because that's not something we should all be looking forward to. If I have to find myself concerned about supply lines and perimeter patrols and everything else related to what we're talking about, then I'm going to be pretty upset that we've got to that point. But these are things we have to consider here in the year 2020, because it just seems to be getting worse. And use the time you have now to plan ahead. Use the time you have now to think about all these different situations and strategies that we have to consider while we have the time, okay? And build out kits for people if you have the ability. I am in a position financially where I can build an extra kit and not spend a ton of money on it, but enough to where I feel good about saying, hey, you're on my team. I know you're not well armed. I know you're not, well experienced, but here, grab this belt. It has a little bit of everything you might need. Grab this rifle. Now you're ready to go and do what I am asking of you, and we should be okay, okay? Those are things that you need to think about when you're, taking care of not just yourself, but your group as well. And I have some great people within my inner circle that I'm more than happy to share this equipment with if things require it. Because at that point, I know that they'll be grateful that I was willing to invest some of my extra money and extra time into putting something together so that they can help me defend the people that we love. So that is important, and that's something that we should all consider, okay? If you have questions about everything we've just gone over, leave them in the comments below. These are things I want to keep talking about and kind of keep front of mind when it comes to us preparing. We all have to stay on top of what's happening, and honestly, this is stuff I enjoy anyway. So building extra kits, you got it. How many people do I need to kit up? Because raise your hand and we'll just start working on more. I have a great time with this stuff. And just keep in mind that these are things that you can actually get from other people too. There's some awesome guys out there that put together kits all the time. So just keep that in mind, because there's some good stuff out there that you can find where people are going to be willing to put stuff together for you without you having to really work too hard on it. So if you have any questions at all, comments below. Otherwise, that's going to be it for Magic Prep.